Listen to that. Well, I'll tell you, and this is getting your question. We tapped into a very, very hungry audience that for years and years and years had been neglected in all the ways that we're talking about. Yep. And they want
1, 2, 3, 4.
Medical sales leader. I am so thrilled to have this person with me today. Hank Balch is here. He is from the sterile processing world. And the reason why you want to get to know this man, to my right, left, I can never quite get which way I'm going to be
around somewhere.
Yeah, right. You're here next to me. Is because he not only shows us how to do this really, really well and helps people in the space really master the art of making sure that instruments are cleaned and to the level that helps other patients thrive, that helps people have, more success in their surgeries and whatever they're doing in the hospital. But he also does it with a true mission at heart. Don't hide it. When there are mistakes, they happen. Let's all work together to actually fix things and progress and move forward. So Hank, I love what you're doing out here on LinkedIn, and I'm so glad to have you today on the show. Thanks so much for coming.
I really appreciate the invite, Claire. And yeah, looking forward to digging into anything under the sun that touches LinkedIn, branding, sterile processing, mission, etc.
Awesome. I remember, back in my medical sales days, I was a little bit removed from the sterile processing rooms. Not for, a reason. They weren't like, Claire, stay out of there. But, when I was in the hospital, mostly it was in pathology or in the OR. And I'll admit, while I knew, Claire, don't even come close to that drape or that tray on the table in the OR, that's as deep as it got with my understanding as what went into sterile processing for surgery. So can you talk a little bit about what the arena looks like, what sterile processing really involves, and why it's so very important that it's done well in the OR?
Yeah, so it's a complex industry. I think that's probably one of the assumptions out there is it's, kind of simple. How hard can it be to clean something or to throw something in an autoclave to get it sterile? Well, in all actuality, it can be pretty complex. It's highly regulatory space or highly regulated space through the CDC, through FDA, through the medical devices that are coming in, and of course, through CMS that does the accreditation side of everything. Our goal in sterile processing is for anything that's reused in the surgical setting, and that's kind of a shock to the public when you're like, hey, did you know that in your surgery, like a lot of the things have been used before, sometimes hundreds of times. Can you imagine like this, not the scalpel blade, but the scalpel handle, the scissors, the clamps, all those things are used again and again. So it's our team in sterile processing that is charged with not only cleaning and sterilizing and reprocessing is kind of the term they use, but also ensuring that it's still functional after use and use and use. So the scissors are still cutting, they're still sharp, the clamps are still clamping, the retractors are still retracting in the way that they did the first day that we bought them, but also that they're ready on time. So what good is a scissor that cuts, that's in the process of becoming sterile, but you're on the table and you need it and it's not ready? So there's a lot of moving parts a lot of regulatory oversight, as I said. And, you know, as you mentioned before, the transparency piece, there's a lot of gaps today that in all actuality, we've got a lot of work to do to get up to the standard that I think patients assume that we're at. But it's a scary place out there. Yeah.
No kidding. Well, and I think that's probably goes for 99% of people out there is, you know, we have the luxury of not having to worry whether the instruments and all the things being used within a surgery are clean or not, you know, are functioning properly, like you said. So when you are when you're first introducing this kind of thing to people, when you're talking about this on LinkedIn, what are the assumptions of you know, what are the assumptions that people make, and what are some things they might be surprised by when it comes to the actual, you know, functionality and cleanliness of these kinds of tools? Like if you were to say most people can expect that everything is 100% clean, or would you say that, you know, maybe it's been trending and getting better over the years? What's it looked like?
So I'm horrible with stats. Just do not have a brain for numbers. But the stats, if you look at the numbers, the number of surgical site infections or the number of healthcare acquired infections, really startling. I mean, anybody who's looking at the data, I think should come away saying, I don't want to have surgery unless I absolutely need it. I don't want to be in a hospital because it's a dangerous place to be. And that's kind of a weird thing to say from the inside, but it's true. And that just goes back again, like I'm all about truth telling, because if we're not honest with the problems, we're not going to work as hard as we should be working to solve them. So that's the first piece. There's an assumption of safety. Now, granted, we have some of the best healthcare in the world, but there's a lot of errors happening every single day in operating rooms across the country, and errors all the way from, you know, patients dropping off of beds to incorrect surgery on the wrong side of your body, like they needed to replace your right knee and they replaced your left knee. Now, that kind of information is like shocking in the public conversation. There's a book out there by Atul Gawande called Complications, and he goes through this idea that we call it practicing medicine for a reason, because there's humans involved and you need to practice this art, and along the way errors are made. It just is what it is. And so the same is true in sterile processing. Even the highest rated department out there with the best people, the best processes will make mistakes. And so the challenge for us is to reduce those mistakes as much as we possibly can, and correctly and clearly communicate to the public what the real challenge and risks are. The last thing I'll say about that piece is, on our side of the equation in sterile processing, we like to challenge folks going into surgery, talking to their surgeons. Everybody wants a good surgeon. Everybody wants a highly rated hospital. They're looking up the quality ratings. Hey, I want a 5-star. I want to go to like the Leapfrog, you know, whatever A+ rating. But nobody's asking, hey, I want a high performing sterile processing team at my hospital. Because I'll tell you, some of the biggest named hospitals out there who you think, oh man, that brand is like beyond compare. This is the best hospital, best research. You go into sterile processing, and oftentimes it is a disaster, for lack of a better phrase. And it's not always their fault. It's not like we have people down there that do not want to do the right thing. Many times there's lack of training, investment, et cetera. But that's where I ultimately, you talk about mission, I want to get the public tuned into these conversations and asking questions as they're going in, saying, hey, how good is your sterile processing team here? Because that's the kind of questions that's going to drive investment.
And what kind of things do you see, like when it comes to a hospital that maybe doesn't have maybe they have a robust brand, but when you're looking under the numbers and you're seeing, okay, wait, something's going on, things aren't being cleaned or fixed or restored to the way that they should be. What does that look like? Like for layman's terms, what are the markers that show that, hey, there needs to be some changes made?
I think everybody who has been in medical device sales or medical sales in general knows the answer to that question, right? Because you get in the doors, you're having conversations behind scenes, you see in the back hallways, you know what's going on. And there's a host of examples of that, right? But for the sterile processing side, I'll just throw out like one common example that's been happening over the last 5 to 10 years, and this is the whole robotic push. All this money and all the branding, all the marketing has been thrown into robotics. And so we got the big billboards out there, and so patients are like, yeah, I want to go in because, it's smaller holes, everything else. Well,
I'm going to recover faster, the works. Yeah.
Yeah. If sterile processing is able to do their job, because those devices are more complex and the cleaning instructions and the sterilization process is more complex, which means more opportunity for error. And very, very simple things like we'll spend a couple of $1 million on a new robot, and then we'll forget, oh yeah, sterile processing also needs a washer that can fit those robotic arms, because when these washers were made, there were no robotic arms. They didn't have anything that long. And we see this like all across the country scaled out again and again and again. We got new devices coming in, and technology down sterile processing to keep up with that complexity is just not keeping up.
Yeah. And who, how can that start to keep up? Is it teams who are in hospitals saying, hey, we've got these things here that we really can't clean, we can't restore properly, we need help? Or are there committees? How does it happen? How do you get the right cleaning instruments in there?
I mean, you're asking the question. And I know our team at Beyond Clean, our model is the conversation has to come out of the basement, which is where a lot of these sterile processing departments are, into the public arena, into social media, into print media, into video, in a way that's going to capture not only the attention of the hospital administrators, because that's usually where we start, but you need pressure on them to say, oh yeah, like, now there's like an NBC nightly news story about this, okay, now we're going to get some things fixed, right? Yeah. Or even like a local newspaper, right? Like when the stuff hits the fan, you get a lot of investment, a lot of attention, but we don't want it to get to that spot. And that's why we really need to be creative about how we communicate and put that pressure on proactively.
Yeah. I mean, I can imagine that, hospital systems are like shaking in their shoes right now, hearing this kind of thing, because really, I mean, hospitals are huge organizations. There are a lot of skeletons in the closet and things that they're either fixing, trying to fix, or don't know they need to fix yet. So, say if a hospital administrator were to see, hey, we're seeing a trend here with surgeries, and we think maybe sterile processing is where we need to, put some more support. How do they go about that? Do they call Beyond Clean? Is there a what's the best way for them to like take steps toward remedying that?
I mean, they can call us if they want to, but we're not going to be able to help them too much. On the practical side of things. Now, I'll tell you like a couple of things. That we talk to hospital administrators on a regular basis when it comes to education, because a lot of what we do through Beyond Clean is that clinical education conversation, in equipping all of these frontline technicians with the information that they need to ask questions. Because again, a lot of these gaps is just because there's not been that upfront investment in training, in ongoing education and support to know, oh yeah, this is against standards, or what are the standards? And then how do we navigate the justification process, to get a new washer, to get new equipment, et cetera. But the first steps, from that administrative kind of perspective is to engage the clinicians, especially these department leaders, in those ongoing questions around quality, infection prevention, because many times you've got these like quality committees, and you've got the chief of surgery, you've got the OR director, you've got quality and risk, and the one person who's not in the room is the sterile processing manager and director. And that's it's really a shame because our voice is not even present in these conversations to be able to give feedback, to ask questions, to raise our hand and say, hey, if you buy this robot, I'm going to need this washer downstairs. That we don't even get that opportunity because they're not at the table. So a lot of what we do again on our team is we encourage these department leaders to do what we call build your own chair, and invite yourself to the meetings, find out where they are and just say, hey, I'm coming. I'm not on the invite list, but I'm coming because I need to be there. And the more you do that, the more welcome and the more value that everyone else is going to see that you bring to those things, because it's a critical part to safe patient care.
Why do you think that's so interesting? And I'm so glad you're empowering people in that way. Why do you think that of all those departments, sterile processing is getting the treatment that it sounds like it does?
Yeah, it's not a sexy department. It's not a revenue generating department. Number one, that's probably the first place that people go is it's a cost center. Going back to where we started, and there's an assumption that it's kind of a simple job. You just put dirty instruments out or in, and then clean instruments come out. How hard can it be? And then to add complexity to it, and this was actually an interview that we did on one of our podcasts with a doctor named Larry Muscarella, talking about antibiotics. So this is a real kicker, and this is kind of the scary piece, is many times folks don't realize how bad or broken the process is, because we're using all of these drugs prophylactically prior to surgery. And so even if we are introducing organisms, the patient's still not getting an infection because we got these drugs, which is good. That's the success. The patient did not get a surgical site infection, but the process is broken. And as everybody knows now we're talking about these multi-drug resistant organisms, the superbugs as they're called. And so that plan of action is not a long-term solution anymore. So now it's becoming even more important to get sterile processing fixed today before we run out of the drugs tomorrow.
Yeah, no kidding. Oh, it's terrifying. My husband's a provider, and I remember early when we were dating, he and I had a long talk about, resistant, what's the word I'm searching for? Thank you, superbugs. But things that are resistant to the traditional antibiotics we've been taking for decades. The Z-Pak, right? Who hasn't taken a Z-Pak in their life or heard of that? And now, unfortunately, we're seeing the ramification of, people aren't being, they're not able to get the solution that they once were by taking things like that. So do you think that when it comes to empowering the people of that department, because I think in some sense, wherever we are in the hospital, whether you're reps, if you're here listening and you're a medical sales rep or manager, or maybe you're in sterile processing yourself, is there a way that you are empowering the people in that unit to take this upon themselves to say, okay, I know that my hospital may be deprioritizing my work here, right? So it's not maybe as front and center as it needs to be. How do you empower people in that department to really take the reins here and jump on with the mission of getting things more clean, but like the overall mission?
Yeah. So this is kind of where I part ways with the industry status quo response to that question. And it really, I guess maybe 6 or 7 years ago, I started talking about this and blogging about it because I was in the department. I'd been a technician. I was then managing and directing departments in Kentucky and Texas. And the stock answer to that question is we need more education. We need to become certified is kind of the answer. And that's the answer that we've been given for decades, by the way. It's not a new answer. We've been trying this certification game for years and years and years, and yet no change. No change in the respect, no change in the quality in the data, all of those things, no change. So I'm sitting there thinking like, well, guys, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing,
right,
and
over
expecting
and
different results, right?
Yeah.
So what are we doing? So I tend to say, okay, we love education, right? My whole company is built around education. So we value education, but not as the only solution or the best solution for bringing us out of the shadows and out of the basement. Instead, I would proffer two things. Get creative about how we communicate. Stop talking to ourselves, because that was happening in the industry. We go to our conferences, we talk to ourselves. Right. We do this magazine that only our industry reads, right? Like nothing is ever leaving this echo chamber, and we're surprised why no one else knows about us. So get that message out. Number two, and it kind of goes to the comment that I mentioned that I'm not good at stats, but data is our friend. So all the data that we can bring out in front and keep pushing it out until other people who can do things with that data, or that data makes sense to, like data scientists or other physicians or other epidemiologists, like all of those people, if we keep pushing data out of our departments out in front, there will be people who it lands on their radar, and then they've got the power, they got the insight to do something with it.
That's great. And you know what, too, I think that although it's great not to just talk with the people that, like you said, are in the industry and keep that to be a closed conversation, one thing I know about you, other than how you're very mission driven with this cause, which is amazing. I think that the way that you talk about this issue, the way that you talk about what the future could look like for healthcare in this way is really inspiring. But another thing I think is you're really leading the way in connecting with others in the industry digitally to make the conversation bigger. And I think that, data is great. And then when we know what to do with it, or when we share it, that's when it really has power. So do you have any examples of how, you're networking, you're being on LinkedIn and sharing your mission of, getting clean, right? How that's really spurred change in an organization or with teams? Like, can you tell me a little bit about what the effect has been that you've seen?
It's really shocking to me, the impact that small little podcasts, right? So like, let's just think about this for a second. Okay. 2017, podcasting is not new, but it's still in its kind of toddler stage. And this random guy on LinkedIn reaches out to me randomly through LinkedIn and says, "Hey, Hank, I've been seeing you kind of blogging on LinkedIn, writing on LinkedIn about sterile processing topics. Have you ever thought about creating a podcast about sterile processing?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, I've thought about it, but it seems like a lot of work and I don't want to do it by myself." And out of that conversation, not only would we launch a podcast about sterile processing, the most random podcast in the world. Like there's probably a couple more random than that, but pretty freaking random. It would then grow into not only a very successful podcast that's been downloaded now in 160 countries. I keep waiting for North Korea to start listening. They haven't started listening yet, but you're on my map, North Korea.
We're coming.
And then we also got this past month, we crossed over the 1 million download mark. For a sterile processing podcast, like who does that? Who listens to that? Well, I'll tell you, and this is getting your question. We tapped into a very, very hungry audience that for years and years and years had been neglected in all the ways that we're talking about. And they wanted not only technical information, because that was the one thing that we were pretty good at. We were pretty good at talking about what are the standards, what are the regulatory, like what is required of you. What we weren't good at is, okay, yeah, but how do you do those things? Like, are we sharing best practices? And are we bringing synergies like what you mentioned outside of our four walls into like, can we talk to surgeons? Can we talk to infection prevention? Can we talk to entrepreneurs and innovators that are doing fun, creative things? Can we talk to other people outside of our country? We started doing all that through this platform and podcast that we launched. And yeah, the list is like so long. I can't begin with the businesses that have been launched because they heard an episode on the podcast and like, hey, that's a good idea. I'm going to go do that thing. And we're like, wow. So like I flew out to the middle of Wyoming a couple of years ago, and it was this guy who like had listened to podcasts a couple of years before and started a company to solve a solution in sterile processing. The same story is true. Like we have folks that will listen to the show in their staff meetings in sterile processing as a way to spark conversation in their departments about their processes to change the way that they do things to care for patients. So that kind of data, like I don't have that in a spreadsheet anywhere, but it's been kind of thrust out into the emails and into the direct messages, so much that I know that it's having an impact, even outside of the download numbers and that kind of stuff.
Oh, that's amazing. And I think that, not that everybody maybe knows this yet, but, you having this outreach on social media to get this message out, I don't think it was just an industry win. I think it's certainly an industry win because finally these people have, these folks in these departments have some really specific content that relates to them, can spark these conversations. But personally, I know that for you, this is a big win as well, because when it comes to your growth as like a speaker and a businessman, what was it like starting a podcast, in the first place? Because knowing this is my second go around. The first time we had a podcast, it was called Power Hour. And like you, I started it with a couple buddies and it was great. But, it's not for the faint of heart either. You got to keep showing up every day and making sure you're bringing value to the generous people who are here to listen. So can you talk a little bit about what the beginning stages were like for you personally for this podcast?
Yeah. So if there's one person in the industry that you would think would not be the one to start a podcast, I would be that person. Right. So surprise. And the reason, what's kind of curious, the reason that me and our co-founder found each other is because I was writing, and that's really what I was passionate about. I loved writing. That was kind of my skill set, even like through college. But it was because in grade school, all the way up until basically junior, senior, and high school, I had a severe speech impediment and stutter and stammer. And so any kind of public speaking, like I understand that all kinds of people don't like public speaking, but I wasn't only in there because I didn't like public speaking. I was scared. It's like, no, literally I could not get my words out of my mouth to communicate. And then all of the embarrassment, all the anxiety and everything else that came with that. And so even though now today through a lot of speech therapy and everything else, I am now managing my speech, that is still inside my head and inside me somewhere. And so when we started talking about this podcast, one of the things that sold me is, hey, we can edit. So I got to give a shout out to all my producers, through the years that have suffered through the early edits, especially of this guy who, like, speaking was not my gift at all. Through that, though, and this is the other kind of second thing that we learned along the way, is we were probably 4 or 5 episodes in, and we did a weekly. We're still doing a weekly show, but we launched with the weekly episodes. We did 52 weeks in a row in that first year.
Wow.
And early on, like I said, like 4 or 5 episodes in, I realized, hey, people are tuning in not to listen to me. They're tuning in to listen to the guest. And that just took a lot of pressure off of the host, because you're just there like your ear candy, right? You're not there to carry it along or nothing. You're just there to find great guests, to platform great ideas and great insights and get out of the way. And I've been doing it successfully ever since. I've been getting out of the way for 5 years now.
Hank, Hank's been getting out of the way. You're too modest. So first of all, I mean, I just commend you because I know what a grind it can be to stick with something that long. And so every time I listen to something that you produce, I hear incredible value from it. From the what we were talking about right before we started recording, which was the videos that you're doing on each individual instrument to orient people, to the audio rooms you're doing on LinkedIn, like the one I saw you in with Johnny Cafaro recently. Like,
right.
You were definitely meant to do what you're doing. And I think that the way that you overcame an incredible challenge to truly help people in this arena is really something. So I'm excited that you're here. And also the editing tool is my friend as well. Very much so.
Yeah. Amen.
So let me ask you this. I know our time is coming to a close here, but if someone wants to get in touch with you, learn from you, learn where, in this case, medical sales professionals, management, anybody listening today can make it even more clear that sterile processing is a key element to the healthcare process and maybe how they can help, where can they get in touch with you and find out more about what you're doing at Beyond Clean?
Yeah. So I would tell you, before you get in touch with me, if you're in medical device sales, go down and find your sterile processing department in the hospitals that you're going in today. Knock on their door and say, hey, you don't know me. I don't know you. I don't know anything about sterile processing, but I would like to know, can I schedule time to come check things out and just talk to your team? If you do that for me, that's mission accomplished. Two, track me down on LinkedIn. That's my baby. I've been here for 9 years or so. And you can look me up at linkedin.com/in/sterile processing. How about that for a vanity URL? Okay. And then you can track down everything that we're doing at Beyond Clean at beyondclean.net. Got 300 plus continuing education opportunities there, a ton of podcasts, ton of videos, a lot of articles, and just a lot of good conversation, like you said, Claire, about challenging the status quo, trying to build up and outward together as an industry, not just in sterile processing, but all of healthcare.
I love it. Yeah. I mean, it's a team approach, right? And when I think when we approach it that way, when we really get known in departments where we may have nothing to do with, but we know that as a team, we can make things more efficient and better for patients. It makes all the difference. So if you're listening today, thank you so much for joining me and Hank. And I'm going to put all those links that he mentioned so that you can connect with him. You can learn more about what he's doing with Beyond Clean and find him over on LinkedIn, his baby of 9 years, today in the show notes. So thank you so much for joining me today, Hank. I really appreciate it. And here's to the next one. Okay.
All right. Sounds great.
Thanks.